Like she said, and I do want to be cognizant of time here, but the purpose of today's discussion is to walk through Anaplan's latest workforce app. We've been kind of hard at work on this for, Tim, I don't know, several months now, and I'm proud to present our vision of how we can really enable HR as a partner to reach out to the lines of business that they're trusted to support and make sure that everyone is executing on a labor plan that speaks to the lines of value for each group. That's my young beardless face up there. But my name is Matt Hardman. I've been with Anaplan for it'll be 2 years in June now. Out of the East Coast, living north of Philadelphia now. But I have spent the last probably year and a half working to help define Anaplan's market vision for workforce planning and speaking about workforce planning to a variety of different customers. So and as far as the agenda goes today, given the time constraint, I think we're going to be focused primarily on the product, but I'm here until about 7:30 on Thursday morning. So if you can catch me sometime between now and then, I'd be more than happy to talk with you. Before I get too far into this, how big does that look on the screen? Should I make it any larger? All right, I'm glad I asked. Is that better? Yeah. Cool. So speaking to the line of value that Frank was harping on in the keynote this morning, Anaplan obviously we're making our company on this idea of connected planning. And because I'm sure folks are fairly familiar with Anaplan as a platform, but just I want to set some table stakes. The fact that we can go ahead and plan out any variety of your business in whatever kind of granularity that particular part of the business needs, and then can pass that with context through to other parts of the business, is really how we're shaking up the space. I'm going to be walking through the workforce planning app, but when I see this, I don't see it necessarily as an app, but a set of functionality and capabilities that you can enable other folks in the organization to really better plan talent. So as I spin this up here, it's going to direct me to a finance-driven process page. And what I have in here is really illustrative of the depth of content that we're bringing to bear with this iteration of workforce planning. We have a variety of different processes that come out of the box, ranging from executive to a finance-driven process, sales ops, HR, and operations. And each one of these are tailored user experiences that are really set to enable different groups to get the value out of the same common technological development. I'm going to first start off with this tops-down budget setting process to, from a finance perspective, inform the lines of business I support to understand essentially how much money they're going to be able to spend on talent. And then we're going to walk through from a bottoms-up standpoint, understanding how our workforce sits today. We've done some fairly cool stuff around attrition modeling. And then once we understand where and who is sitting in the organization today, we can then build up a bottoms-up plan with context to the different teams we support to create new requisitions and then execute on them through to our recruiting team. But first off, I'm going to start with this tops-down budget setting process. And a lot of this is going to be essentially par for the course with what we're doing with Anaplan, right? I am leveraging multidimensionality, focusing in on this sales department, bringing in my current year headcount expense. It's tying into some core HR system. I can see that for my direct sales department, I spent about $5 million last year. I'll override that to, let's say, be 65% of the budget instead of the 83 that it was disproportionately last year, which is going to give me 7.5 upon which I can spend and break back the others relative to what I held at the high level. I can proportion this down really as granular as I'd like from a budgetary perspective. Sometimes you may only want to hold direct sales to be a high-level number. but in other cases, maybe you want to proportion that out across different regions or cost centers that you may support as well. And if we want to get as granular as forecasting out a particular, the intersection of region and role, we can do really any sort of those things. But as I'm going through this process, I want to call attention to the graph that I have on the right side of the screen, because this is really key to how we're going to be able to not take workforce planning from an annual process, but able to, transform our vision of it to make it much more of a iterative, flowing process as well. So right now, this is going to look on a year-over-year basis, but we can obviously, as you improve your cadence for the workforce planning process, we can work with you with that. But I can go ahead and say I have 48 folks in my components line of business within sales in the US today, or in my prior year. I'm forecasting one of them to transfer out into a different division. Two of them are, have the ability to transfer in, and I can get into much more of that in a separate discussion if you'd like to understand how we can model that out. But then I'm looking at an overall attrition number of this. I'm expecting 7 headcount to attrit, and this is really important when it comes to leveraging the predictive power of Anaplan. So what I've done from a workforce supply standpoint is for any role within the organization, in the intersection of role and region, we've gone ahead and pulled in historical attrition rates of on a month-over-month basis upon the past 2 years, right? And we're taking those historical attrition rates and running those against, I'll drill into, let's say, my enterprise reps. We're running those against, in this case, I think it's 13 different algorithms upon which we are predicting what the best fit over the historical time series was and using that as a proxy for our future historical performance. Upon this, now I'm understanding, okay, I have 6 enterprise reps in the US East. One is going to transfer in April, but layering on these attrition rates over time, now I can understand that I'm expecting essentially 1 to attrit starting in July of 18, right? On the micro perspective, that's powerful, so we can understand, that Matt might not be with this line of business for as long as we'd like him to be. But on the macro perspective, this enables you to answer much more strategic questions. Like, if I leave, what accounts are now going to go uncovered? What are the revenue implications of that? And all sorts of things of that sense. Getting back to this screen here, I'll end on this 42 additional heads, right? Upon which now I can go ahead from a bottoms-up workforce demand standpoint, I can execute on it. Across this intersection, I'm going to view my business in a variety of different ways, right? I'm looking at all the enterprise reps in the US regardless of line of business. And I see that I currently have 21 that exist, and I haven't done anything to these reps. So I have 21 that are going to exist in the future. But I can also see that I've created functionality that can enable me to change this forecast as I'd like. So depending on different roles, there are going to be different ways in which you can plan your workforce. Potentially, I want my field service to be, or my field sales to be planned in a different way than I want, core office of the CFO type roles, right? So I want to be able to flexibly plan a variety of different roles in a way that can, aggregate up to the budgetary view. I'm going to, for the interest of time, I'm going to focus in on, let's say, we'll start with the field sales and see where we go, but the field sales is definitely important. So this really enables me to tie to the great work we're doing in the SPM space. So what I'm doing here, and I'll go ahead and zero this out for demo land. I'm understanding, okay, I have a $52 million gap that finance is directing me to solve from a sales operations standpoint, right? How can I go ahead and relative to my capacity, my sales team, build up against that? What I'm doing here is, again, across whatever lines of business I'm responsible for, I'll focus in on my mid-market Southwest division to start. I'm scoring essentially what the optimal headcount or what the optimal rep to account capacity should be. So for mid-market reps, it's going to be 750, enterprise 75, key 15, so on and so forth. And then bullying that up against how I've segmented my accounts in an SPM model. Enabling that, I'm able to see for the reps that I currently have on board, how many accounts are currently being unoptimally covered. And I can do that in really terms of the number of accounts, but I'm using the share of market that's being uncovered, to drive what the most impactful marginal additional head is going to be. So as I start adding in one head count to the Southwest, it's redoing all of these calculations. So now I can say the next marginal head count is going to be in the Midwest, and I can continue to play whack-a-mole across all of my different sales lines, regions, and lines of business to figure out what the best plan to go to market is. So it's going ahead and understanding I have 5 enterprise reps coming through, 2 mid-market reps, and this is going ahead and closing my gap within some tangible margin of error. Workflow is incredibly important based on the varying populations that have their hands in a workforce planning process. So I'm going to go ahead and submit this to create recs for sales roles. As this loads this process, I'll then go ahead, and it's all locked down, and pivot into a capacity analysis dashboard, where looking across, let's say, the entirety of the US, what this has gone ahead and done is it's created recs. I'll focus on the one that's created in the Northeast relative to the capacity analysis that I'm doing. Now, here in the Northeast, I have an enterprise rep teed up. I'm going to have the start date be, let's say, April 1st. Good luck. And as I do that, it's going to immediately keep in context with the sales plan that I've just, or the capacity plan that I've just executed. So really now, truly, the left hand and the right hand are talking together. If I want to go ahead and start, bumping up capacity adjustments or things like that on a onesie twosie type basis, I can do, we can plan that out in context as well.
When that rec is created, does it create it in your ATS or Workday or whatever HR system that you're using, or is it specific just to Anaplan?
So that's a very good question, and there's a Anaplan. I feel as though Anaplan is best used as a planning system, right? So we'll go ahead and create rec placeholders in Anaplan, put them in context with the budgetary allotment that's been passed down with finance, and make sure with workflow that everything's completely copacetic, right? Then we can go ahead and take those requisitions and pump them into whatever your system of record is going to be for those requisitions. There's a lot of ways we can do that, and I'd love to have that conversation. Yes. And once we create that, those new headcount rec placeholders, there's going to be downstream impacts in this case for a sales department, right? I think of my role. Within Anaplan, we manage my role to some ratio of account executives, right? Be it 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 4-to-1, whatever the case may be, however many sales reps they hire is going to impact however many sales engineers they hire. So what we can go ahead and do now is, depending on, let's say, a product specialist, I can constrain it by a different portion of the organization and handle it to a different sort of ratio. So if I want to manage this to be 6-to-1, immediately it's going to show me, based on the constraint headcount, how many FTEs potentially I'm going to need to be required. And then I can create all of the recs across all of the different organizations that I'm supporting here. So as I create all of these rec placeholders, I'll pause and give us kind of an understanding of what we're working through here. So from our workflow perspective, right, I've locked some of these rec placeholders through, and now I'll go ahead and harp on the operational labor outlook as well. And really, as I see it, the power here is enabling different parts of the organization to plan in different ways. So when I go ahead and start to have conversations with different industries and different parts of an organization, the labor challenges vary really. There's workforce planning means 20 different things to 20 different people, right? This will tightly enable the supply chain, the operations team, through to the workforce plan team, where I can go ahead and say, from my supply planning application, I think there's a lot of applicability across a variety of different use cases for something like this. I have a set amount of hours that I need to provide labor for. If I want to dimensionalize that by type of employee, all sorts of things like that, I can absolutely go those ways. But I can then work down to understand essentially what a gap is going to be based on my labor supply versus the labor demand that's coming from these supply chain type systems. And this is a fairly neat what we're able to do here is I can go ahead, I'll zero this out for illustration's sake to begin with. I can see that I have a large gap that appears to have some sort of seasonality to it. First thing I want to do is I want to make sure that everything from a baseline perspective, I want to hire FTEs at least to the lowest level of seasonality across the year. So I have one problem that I can immediately solve. I'll add 6 FTEs here. That raises me up through to the threshold that I now have 16 FTEs across the year, managing to a December 17 that's not going to achieve the FTE threshold that I set. Now I can go ahead and start staffing the excess gap with temporary laborers. So I'll add, let's say, 6 here, which will then change my demand and supply framework, right? I might be overstaffed if I staff 6 here, so maybe I'll back 3 off. And I'll continue so on and so forth across time, really going ahead and minimizing the labor gap across time. And what this is going to really enable me to do is now I can go ahead and submit these FTEs, for both the FTEs and the temps through. And while we can now go ahead and understand the impact of these temporary or the FTEs on our budget, I've built logic in here to enable, let's say, a temp hiring schedule, right? Where relative to the plant we're supporting, I'm following a first in, first out basis on how I want to schedule these temps, right? So there's 2 things I'm doing here. Number 1, I'm making sure that I'm fulfilling my operational KPIs to the stakeholders in the supply chain space, but I'm also going ahead and controlling for my temp cost, or maybe it's not even controlling for my temp cost, but now I'm able to predict what my temp cost is going to be, and I can understand and pass this sort of information off to the recruiting team as well. And then finally, there are going to be roles within the organization that you may not have such a scientific way of predicting, right? In this case, if I look at, let's say, installers. Let me go ahead and, as luck would have it, this is why you practice your demos. I have a need for installers to come in the Mid-Atlantic, and I have budget for it, right? What I've currently done is I've backed into, relative to historical hiring seasonality for the firm, a hiring plan for these installers, controlling for what I think the average ramp time for the installers is going to be. Now, I think there are different types of functionality that this can provide. But one of the great things is the ability to do iterative scenario analysis. So if I look ahead at, let's say, July, I know that I need to add a new installer headcount. I'll add that, and that's going to populate an installer into my hiring plan starting January 17. I can then go ahead and pass these recs through, run this process, and I can do a very similar thing for the other areas of my organization as well. Cognizant of time, I want to end on this screen, right? This is going to be tying the tops-down budgetary setting through to all of the work we've done with operationally creating the recs. Now I'm going to be able to, for the recs, understand down to the effective date how this is going to impact my budget. Right, so I have the direct sales rec that I created for here, and it's taking in about $56,000 relative to whatever salary baseline we're bringing into the system. If I want to override this, and maybe Tim deserves a little bit more money, I can bring him in at grade 8 and the 75th percentile, and it will. I guess I picked the exact right number. But now I can go ahead and open up an approval dashboard. And this really gets to understanding, and I think this is a key capability of Anaplan, where I can go ahead and I could manage my current workforce down to effectively dating them, giving them bonuses, all sorts of things like that, and manage their total compensation, potentially in a different pool that I want to manage my recs, because those are going to feed from 2 different systems typically. But I want it to both aggregate up to the number that finance is holding me to. So as I go ahead and with workflow, let's say I approve this rec. Down to the effective date that I started in the capacity standpoint, now I can go ahead and understand, across all of this, how is he actually going to be paid, right? And track all of that through to the approved compensation that's come from finance, the budgeted compensation from the bottoms up standpoint, both the existing headcount and the new recs that we're forecasting out. And I can also forecast, what the variance is, and if I have a variety of different recs that have not been fully approved relative to this last financial threshold, I can keep track of what that total pool of funds is as well. So I've got 30 seconds left. So I don't know if there's necessarily going to be time for Q&A. But if there's one thing that I can leave you with, it's the fact that there's a core set of capabilities here that can enable you to probably take workforce planning challenges that you may not have been able to quickly solve today and deploy against in a way that can provide very fast time to value. If you have any questions, please feel free to shake me down in the rest of the conference. Thank you.
We have a 5-minute break, so if you want to just answer a couple questions while up there.
I'm here. Let's do it.
If people want to leave, this is the time probably to switch to another room because we're not by any, but if people have questions, go ahead and ask Matt.
Talking about the built-in algorithms, especially on the attrition side, I think that's something my company struggles with.
Yes.
What are those, and how do we get to them, and how do we use them?
So the algorithms are it's a series of time series algorithms essentially, right? What I did was I took our statistical forecasting app that exists in the App Hub today and built in my role hierarchies to it. Okay. So if you're an existing Anaplan customer, look at the statistical forecasting app, and you'll get that out of the box.